12,000 new faces in Jerusalem. 70. War, Wrath and Redemption. The Time of Jacob's Trouble. The sequel. All rights reserved. Ely James, 2023. War Scene 1. Opening chapters. Where? When? Why? On the multi-pronged military front. Dead Sea Oil, The Hook, 70. Ely James. It won the monikor name the post that God himself defended in the Yom Kippur War, year 1973. It, or one considerable military engagement therein, was known also as the Valley of Tears, as Syrian forces had removed the tarps from their ground-devouring chain-smoking tanks. Back then, neither by weapons contribution or caches of munitions funds and artillery hulking howitzers lent by a leader like North King Alexandres Krishinochev, Russia's prince whose task was manifold during this Third World War that had already spilled more blood than the first two world wars combined. All roads lead to Rome had religious canototation only, as the phrase itself was in reference to a tumultuous Jerusalem during these hours. The very earth seemed to concur, as black liquid gold was the byproduct discovery of a holy land that was rocked by it, a seismic earthquake that into smithereens smashed the Richter scale before it had split open regions of Euphrates, of the Galilee Sea, and here ye are. Hear ye. Opportunists hither to the forefront, and forthwith as the mineral-rich Dead Sea, lowest elevation on planet Earth, responded to men's wars, including the betraying of ulterior motives by disclosing a secret of secrets of unthinkable proportions, for man's fathoming and plumb lines scarcely could penetrate rock down there, everything in its time. Move over gas-replete fields of no. Move over Mediterranean Sea and let the repositories of mid and far eastern Earth finally take notice. The targeting eye, seeing through the scope that was economy, albeit she was starved and breathing through merely one lung, was fast trained on scarcely Israel's indomitable victories over the terrorist-harboring regionettes who were draped in manifestations of the colors of the apocalyptic horses that shapes not coincidentally resembled the nation of Iran, but was focused on that beeline bleeding down to her angrily spewing earth. Without so much as one exploratory burrowing bit of man plunged into subterranean rock there. Boasted via terrific fountains of glittery diamond replete streams of Earth's newly discovered natural resource that wrangling armies had felt. And as though overnight, privy to adding defeated land regions as liberators to a sizable and thankful populace that aka monitor was given the name human shields. This was one thing, as boundaries were extended to something resembling what Abraham might have seen beneath those stars, but to monopolize the oil fields now too. For what was left untouched by this people? The saying had went, conquistadors might have said, he who controls Jerusalem or the British Isles may be the one who arguably controls the world and oceans and trade channels entire. But the plenary of earth passing through the very region that was said to have to synthetically manufacture all that it possessed, the prospect of this nation bleeding the contracts of interdependent Europe dry, well, enough was enough. Say what we will about the infighting and tangly rifts, but who can deny that a sizable amount of disruption is what the doctor called for? First land, then children, and now complete hegemony and the monopolizing of what invigorates and keeps industry afloat. At all costs let us struggle with how to proceed, only after having our hands filthily drenched in world's greatest boast down there. All sails set for her, let us batten down the hatches. Let them remember the infamous history of this place, said Alexandres Krishinochev. She tells the tale of a territory that's been conquered many times before. Let him decide. In the face of Russian encroachment, of Ayatollah's Iran, the Turkish forces and groups assembled by very Egypt herself with aerial campaigns and battalions of tanks en route, along with the public at home tarring them to shreds alongside the International Crimes Court and the United Nations under Nasser Abu Matter Hussein. Let him determine their fate as they are surrounded by motes of people on every side. Russia is juggernaut taking on the tyrants of Napoleonic wars and then of despots of Nazi Germany a couple wars subsequent. He again took his deemed 12th Mahdi Nassers, Arab fighting forces prisoners of war. 'Twas a million easily, including even insurrectionist defectors who were detained in diamond-fenced cages and sickly and starving with attrition and the weakening of moral. The goal as suddenly the purse strings of the Middle East was feathered inside of the hands of Israel, a people who was seen as surmounting on even the wings of the pyre as the destructive phoenix did time and again pass over her. While the detained throngs herded up beneath the skies infested with Turkish MiG jets who could only turn the eye to these ones carted off to Russian land. For sure too numerous to consume limited acreage there, but 'twas scarcely so vast that self-dug graves couldn't course through the mountains regions here. Russia's war abroad, yet to entrench foxhole divots was the prudent thing. That is what they were told they were digging as the return of ration food portions at meals' end continued to so disproportionately increase, which too was disproportionate to the reports delineating attacks on Motherland's Moscow. Krishinochev had every right to be incensed. Even so transformed of character like so. Ordering the genocide of so many Arab people, again many of whom defected away from the radical Islamic despots and who disassociated from the extremist anti-West agenda entire as America's own policing forces on mountain ranges, in increasing numbers not coincidentally looking like relatives of these thickly bronzed men and women. This was what vindicated the courts in the early charges levied against the man. Here he was acting it out while Allied forces beginning their surreptitious encroach. Dressed like Russian soldiers, bearing the brutal Arctic cold while talking in the language of shivering Russians. Pretending to even shoot at the detained. Such shooting so commonplace that one could in the least bit know the difference as living and dead bodies undraped were dragged into the long snaking canals of furrowed earth in freshly excavated trenches. It was hard to believe, with so many Russians keeping guard in the Caucasus mountain clefts like this, that there could be any left fighting abroad directly against Nasser and pietist henchmen and Confederate leagues. Far less advancing on Israel, while the earliest concussions boomed in tremendous sulfuric thuds that shook low-level stratosphere off of the coast of Haifa as Israel's subcommanders learned of the vast subterranean maritime participants' resistance. Ever close to where indefatigable Israeli air forces were planning surprise counter-offensives in daring swordless missions as cover over the tanks on Golan and from a foothold Parcel 1 in Syria. Just as had IDF forces dominated in the anti-terrorism campaigns against Gaza and Egyptian hosts. Hemmed in mightily yet ardently defending. So too were the reportings of miracles amid these macro campaigns abounding. Alexandres Krishinochev smoked an American Eagle's frontiersman destroyer on this day in September, cut in half, crankily breaking apart before it was nose up to kiss rings of smoke plumes that threatened to blanket the twilight sky with dawn prematurely chasing. The Russians fired inland to melt a strategic post and air command installation. Close to 100 lives lost and threatened in that one stealthy mission. 3 Turkish MiG jets fell like flies. Unclear to the very hour if that was inland anti-aircraft fire from Israel. Misfire from Krishinochev's own naval forces or from the relative few MiG F-15s and Physics 1 to F-22 redeployed Raptors that were amid shelling up their musically dodging enemy wing fire. The so-called Stars and Stripes mutiny ship credit Krishinochev for that one, although he didn't have much room to talk with, quote-unquote, the innumerable orders stamped with the mercurial sturgidity of Kremlin orders to return home, these going unheeded. That was former prey Dalton Benson jabbing back. She, the US Frederick McCann, seemed to be secretly harboring information with an imagined glimmer in her eye down there, as large as she was and thus far impervious to Turkish fire from pelleting rounds overhead. How quickly things did rearrange during these hours put on loan, the feeling was. On a recent occasion, Krishinochev at a hot mic boasted of a superior naval force out there. They did great damage, but 'twas scarcely without the decommissioning assaults finally sinking the sun as night fell over top of an obliterated nuclear sub that was. Weapon pitted against like weapon. Victim to 2 simultaneous hits. 1 per side from vantage point Israel and USA on respective torpedoed sides. The boat finding its place amid undersea junkyard Mesopotamian rest. Fathoms deep. A downsized already fleet was finished here with planes in majestic flight swooping on down and rifling terrific rounds into hulls of ships before payloads were released to retire all of one carrier. It had met with sentimental value amid top brass as ones just like here were decommissioned, 6 to 8 destroyer-class issues. 1 impacting and set afire when coming into contact with a battleship. And 4 cruisers? No. Correct that. Looks like 3 cruiser liners and a ship-fitter vessel that was supposed to see to the wounds of these others. 'Twas clear he couldn't face more days as replicates of this day without admitting that a downsized irreplaceable fleet had gone up in rapacious flames, even spurring on grave cause for his inventory assessment pause. 'Twas another masterful painter's classic best that had on the perimeter of that big fireball of both orange and red. Almost phosphorescent glow. That had spilled like a Stradivarius, sunburst paint job against the tide-beating expanse. Easier to think of her as nature's endowment that had a heart to commiserate losses of instead of thinking her a menace with a scarlet red crimson blush that had sent shoalfish with effervescent shimmering diamond backplates toward the direction of both living and doomed vessels. A distant offing only appearing so close that one could swan dive off of the ship just to head first greet and then lose self into her teeming buoyancy. Next. 70 sequel, parts 1 through 5, War, Wrath and Redemption, The Time of Jacob's Trouble by Ely James. Moon. Font.
April 28, 2026 is what you have to look forward to in the sequel, called 70, The Time of Jacob's Trouble, War, Wrath, and Redemption. It'll be out really soon. This is a later stage chapter. I didn't disclose much at all there. But you'll see that when you get the book. It'll be out soon. Right now, you can get 70, The Time of Jacob's Trouble, Planet Earth's Generation Gog-Mageddon from major retailers and online providers of book and digital and paperback sales. The audiobook is being recorded as we speak. And maybe plans for the hardcover after that. Thank you very much. All rights are reserved. Ely James Literary Publishing, 2023.